Well, welcome. I'm Kate Harmon. I'm the Director of Cross Campus Engagement for the Lundquist Center for Entrepreneurship. And I'm excited today to have with us Eric Jacobs. Eric is the Chief Revenue Officer for Aligned Energy, which is an infrastructure technology company providing innovative solutions around data center storage. So, welcome, Eric. I thought we would start off today with having you talk a little bit about, give us an overview of your career, starting with your college years at UO. What did you major in? What were you involved in? And then kind of taking us up till right now, your present role at Aligned Energy.
Sure, sure. Well, thank you, Kate. I appreciate it, and it's my pleasure to be speaking with everyone at the U of O. It was a great college experience. Yeah, I graduated in 1994 with a Bachelor of Science in Finance and Corporate Management. I love my college experience. I would say towards my junior or senior year, this is pre-internet, right? Well, the internet was just kind of emerging at that time, but I spent a bit of time in the Career Center at the U of O, helping to prepare my resume, understanding how to interview, and then of course going through a lot of the career process through the center there and all the different companies that come through there. I ended up selecting a multinational food manufacturer as my first job, and I did that well before graduation. Very early on into my start with that company, I realized it just wasn't the right path for me in finance. I loved my finance background, but what I was doing, it just wasn't passionate and really didn't connect for me. So I decided to make a few changes, but a long story short, I took a job, came back to California, and shortly thereafter, I met a gentleman who had started a company that had combined wireless technologies, a cell phone, text paging, if the students still know what that is, right, from a text pager, actual pager, and a two-way radio. And this company was called Nextel. And it really struck an interesting chord with me because while at U of O, I had written a paper on the emerging PCS industry. And I remember at the time, this first opening sentence of my paragraph was, can you imagine a world where you're sitting wirelessly by a swimming pool and able to access libraries of information all over through a handheld device? Well, later that became obviously known as the smartphone, but it really struck a chord with me and kind of started this passion I had in technology. And my first job was an outside sales role. I hadn't done outside sales in the past. It wasn't a career I'd set out to achieve, but I very quickly learned that I was able to take a lot of what I had developed both from school as well as what I had learned kind of in my younger years in different jobs and put it to work. And shortly after, a few years, I was promoted to management, and that kind of began a 2.5 plus decade of sales leadership in technology out here in California that has really taken me in a lot of different directions. And most recently joining Aligned Energy, and I held a couple different roles, everything from sales management up to vice president of different divisions and companies around sales leadership, outside marketing, what they call field marketing, as well as facilities and operations roles within corporations. But it all kind of started with, I think, learning something at the U of O that enabled me to make a connection externally that kind of sparked a passion in me around technology.
That's great to hear. Well, let's talk a little bit about your 25 plus years sales enterprise career. You're now overseeing all P&L activity for Aligned Energy. Can you share a little bit of background as to why having a sales background in particular has been successful for you to achieve senior management roles?
Sure. Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, initially I didn't have a specific goal to be in sales, nor did I understand how valuable the background would be. I think coming out of school, I only really knew I wanted to be successful. I wanted to work hard. I wanted to use what I knew my strengths were, which for the most part, strong communication skills, And I wanted to improve some of my gaps and be a little bit humble about just how little I knew. And as I mentioned, after holding a couple different jobs around finance, I knew I didn't want to be stuck in an office every day, nor did I want every day to kind of resemble the last day. I wanted a little bit of variety. And I always enjoyed building relationships and problem solving and processes and helping people. And what I learned is sales kind of encompassed all of that. And so as a result, during the early stages of my career, I kind of set out to understand more about myself and what I liked and what I didn't like, and most importantly, what I was passionate about. And it was really, I think, in Stables that it enabled me to work with all sorts of different companies at different stages of their development. Some in startup mode, some very large public companies, but different industries, whether it's healthcare, finance, technology, government. It really enabled me to be exposed to a lot of different businesses and what their problems were and what they were trying to achieve. And so, I think through time, really knowing, looking back, knowing what I know now in many respects, having that sales knowledge and that sales leadership really kind of propelled me to help out at the senior management level, if that makes sense. I mean, the businesses are really driven, as everyone knows, by two things, and that's revenue production and cost savings. At the end of the day, that's what their drivers are. And so having individuals that not only understand that, but also have the ability to collaborate and work with other departments, whether that's marketing, product development, finance, or legal, and being able to work with those different groups in order to grow revenue and collaborate with those different groups really kind of helps you take that next step up to kind of senior management. So a long story short, one thing to know sales, but another thing to really truly understand how to collaborate with others and to have a focus of what's important to the business that's just more important than what it is that you're trying to individually set out to achieve, is kind of a combination of those two things that I think really helped me as I progressed my way through senior management.
Well, sales is such a highly competitive field, a lot of, as you sort of highlighted,
Right.
Relationship building. Can you share any advice or thoughts around what you think you did particularly well to get ahead? Was it, like
Yeah.
you mentioned, collaboration and being able to connect with others? What kind of things do you think really helped you get that step ahead?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think about this often. I'll tell you that first you need to show up. And I know that sounds really simple. And for a lot of students, they may hear that and say, well, that's really obvious, Eric, painfully obvious. You got to show up. But what I mean by that is you got to show up prepared. You got to show up ready to work hard. And you have to be willing to, you know, accept feedback and coaching along the way, kind of, again, be humble. And feedback is the key to so many different things. But a lot of that is simply table stakes. But just doing that, just taking your job, any job that you have, incredibly serious, working hard and showing up to kind of do your best with the right attitude, I can promise you it will put you in the top 20%, which is an unbelievable statement, but it's true. And so now the trick becomes getting from that top 20% to the top 1%. And that's where I think the hardest work really is. And so the most important thing that I think I've learned is that it's not about you, right? And it's not about anything that you're entitled to or what you're personally trying to achieve at the expense of others. And those others could be your peers at a company, your customers, your boss. It truly, the last thing it needs to be is about you. So I think that that's really served me well as a differentiator. I think secondly is being authentic and understanding how to make true authentic connections with others. I think early in my career, I probably spent a lot more time trying to be something I wasn't, or, trying to figure out who I was in many respects. And as I got older, I really realized that being authentic to who I am and what I'm about is the biggest vehicle to be able to have solid relationships with others and being able to truly connect. Thirdly, when I say it's not about you, it's about understanding and having empathy with what others are trying to solve for. And that involves listening skills. It involves a baseline of a relationship and trust where you can have that empathy to understand what someone else is going through, put yourself in their shoes, understand what they're up against, and then quickly make a determination of whether the solutions and services that you have as a business really can help and fit in. And if they do help and fit in, then you're able to consult with them. And that brings me to kind of my last point, which is having credibility, right? So, it's one thing to not make it about you. It's another thing to be able to authentically connect with others, and then to listen to them, to what their problems are. But if you can have knowledge, if you can bring with you experience to the conversation and have credibility around what you talk about and how you can be of service to those customers, then you've developed a long-lasting relationship and the ability to really collaborate with that customer. And so I think those are some unique things that I didn't have initially coming into sales, but I think that I tried to maintain humility and listen to others and really try and leverage some of kind of that EQ I had to really understand how I could be of service, if that makes sense. And it really isn't probably this last decade that I think that's really kind of truly come together for me to kind of make it about who I am, if that makes sense.
That does. Great advice. I'm really curious. You mentioned earlier that you double concentrated in finance and management, and that your finance maybe wasn't quite as passionate about that background as your management. How has your finance degree, though, helped you through your enterprise sales career into helping you in your present role as Chief Revenue Officer?
Right. So I should draw a distinction, I think, between, I guess, finance and money, right, to some degree. But when I use the word finance, and that not really being something that I was passionate about, it was really doing valuations, long equations, having an inside sales, not inside sales, but an inside working job where I was really working predominantly as a self-contributor, working around numbers and advising the business from only in an internal facing role. That sort of career just didn't really connect with me. Now, finance, and from the standpoint of how the degree has helped me, is really through the realization that at the end of the day, regardless of what product or service you're selling, you're actually selling money. and so the language of money is critical in business. And so what do I mean by that? Having an understanding of what capital costs are, what operational costs are, understanding whether your customer is in a cash flow situation where they may not be able to afford your product and service today, but maybe they are flushed with a capital budget. So maybe not structuring a deal such that they have to use their operational OpEx budget, but they can actually maybe pay for it and use a capital budget. So having that knowledge and language of money, understanding at the end of the day, while my customer may be looking to roll out a product, and that may appear to be their challenge, they're trying to roll out a new product. The reason why they're trying to roll out a new product is to create revenue for their company. And that product release has a deadline, and that deadline is tied to revenue growth. And that revenue growth has a budget that somewhere in the future, someone really cares about. So as a seller, understanding the language of money and how that drives and impacts other organizations has been a critical foundation, I think, to my success and others who understand those components to their success as well. Because at the end of the day, while there are certainly many other very, very important corporate drivers, corporate responsibilities, sustainability, community awareness, community give back programs, all of those programs that create value for your customer, they can't be achieved unless there's some level of profitability. And so understanding that and understanding the role that you play and connecting with them and helping them in that regard is just invaluable. So coming out of the U of O, where I may have had peers in my company that were in sales roles that didn't have that background, I had that background, and it helped to have a deeper level conversation around what my customers cared about, and it was invaluable.
That's great. Let's talk a little bit about your career in managing. I'm curious. You've managed teams as small as 15 to teams that are over 120 employees. What kind of core principles or actions or activities do you use to help manage your team? And do you vary your strategy depending on a smaller team versus larger teams?
Sure. No, it's a great question, and it's one that I think many students may find themselves in if they're interviewing for a management role. But so the first thing is not to nitpick, but I'm going to draw a really clear distinction between managing and leading. I view managing as something that you do at status quo, and maybe even something you do when there's a problem in the organization. Where I view leadership, to me, takes on a very different meaning. Leadership for me means that you're hiring the right talent, you're developing that talent, and you're creating a common purpose for individuals to achieve something that that collectively they didn't think that they could achieve if it hadn't have been for you kind of painting the vision of what needs to be done and where they need to go. So a very clear distinction between leadership and management. And while I've spent a lot of my career in both of those camps, managing isn't what I like to do. And the more time I spend managing, the more time I start to question whether or not I have the right person or have the right people. So that's a clear distinction. And so if you haven't been able to tell by now, I think the most important thing from my perspective is you gotta. I have a saying, right? And this isn't just my saying, but you hire slow and you fire fast. And that may sound a little bit mean to some people, but what it is it's a reminder that you're only as good as the people that you have. And so the better you are as a leader of attracting and developing and retaining the right talent, the more successful you're going to be as a leader, the more successful the organization's going to be. So I think, regardless of the size of the team, whether it's 5 or whether it's 100, and in some cases even more important with a smaller team, who you hire is critical to your success as a leader. The old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. There's a reason why all these old sayings last through time, and it's because it's true in almost everything you do. So hire slow, make sure you have the right people, and if for some instance you've made the wrong decision, help that person get to a better place, either internally at the company or externally into a different role, and try and make that transition as fast as possible. The last thing that I would, sorry about that, got a little email that popped up. The last thing that I would say is, in leadership, be the type of leader that you would want to work for. My number one thing that I look for in others is a tremendous lack of ego. I've never liked to report to people that have a lot of ego, and so I've tried to learn from even those leaders that I've had that I haven't enjoyed working for. I've taken away things that I don't want to do with my team. So don't have an ego, be humble. As a leader, I kind of look at no job is beneath me. If I have to write the order, if I have to get on a plane last minute and go help a customer out, I'm going to do whatever it takes to do the job. And I think my team sees that and respects that. And then last, I think, do what you say you're going to do. I think credibility and integrity is everything in leadership and leading people. And if I make a commitment to my team or to an individual, I got to see it through in order to maintain my credibility. If I'm not credible, I can't lead. And if I'm not willing to do the job I'm asking them to do, I'm also not credible. So a lot of the other textbooks around inspiring greatness and motivating a team, I think those are all really important concepts. But when you break it down to the basics, you got to be the type of leader that you would want to follow.
That makes sense. That's really good, excellent points. I think a lot of our audience will be curious to know maybe what a typical day or week looks like for you at Aligned Energy. Can you share a little bit about what is a typical day in your world?
Sure. Yeah. So Aligned Energy is a bit in startup mode, and I say startup because we're relatively small. I have a history in my career of starting with small companies that then grow to be very, very large companies. And when they get very large and complex and bureaucratic, I tend to leave. But today we're a small company, only 70 employees, but we've raised over $1 billion. And in that short period of time, having $1 billion of other people's money, the first thing we kind of all wake up thinking about is how do we be good stewards of other people's capital? They're entrusting us with their money and their investments. And so we tend to make every decision every day around, returning that shareholder value and being good stewards of their capital. But I guess to break it down in a very realistic, I spend, outside of this whole COVID-19 thing that's going on, I spend typically about 50 to 70% of my time traveling. And when I'm not in the air, I'd say 50% of the time is on internal conversations where there isn't external personnel, it's only internal. And we're talking about raising capital. That could be things like M&A strategies. It could be the industry trends and perspectives and what we're seeing and how do we differentiate and be more competitive. And then the other 50% is also with my team. My team is typically bringing to me different challenges they have around deal strategy, around pricing, around solving customers' problems, and I'll spend a lot of time kind of helping them on a tactical level. And then the other 50% that isn't internal is external, and that's typically with customers, talking about how we help their businesses or how we plan to the future to kind of better align our products and services to meet their needs, not only today, but basically where they're looking to go. And then occasionally we may have some other service issue we got to deal with, but it's not very glamorous. But I think most roles at the end of the day, they're probably in a very similar position where they're spending their time a lot of time on conference calls.
Wow, sounds busy. I know that in addition to your sales leadership background, that you have extensive experience in operations and facilities leadership. And I know from a previous conversation we had that you often, you made the great point that sometimes sales and operations don't always speak the same language. Right. Can you share a little bit about what you mean by that, and what do you do to help promote sales and operations on getting on the same page?
Yeah, it's and I'll give you a little bit of background there to kind of make it a little bit more meaningful. In my last company, I made the mistake of telling my CEO that I was a little bored and I didn't feel as challenged as I needed to be. So in addition to sales, he gave me all facilities and operations, which was about an additional 100 people. And I quickly found myself leading a group of mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, and facilities people that were really looking at me going, this is a sales leader. Why is he over facilities and engineering? And what I started to realize is that the two groups, let me back up even a little bit further. One of the critical problems that I think we were trying to solve, which is not unique to companies, most companies have issues with the sales organization effectively having a good working relationships with the operations organization and vice versa. And so one of the tasks that I set out to do was trying to solve what exactly created that gap, and how do we resolve the gap? How do we build bridges over that gap? And what I learned is that the operations team typically had very specific disciplines they had to do around the things I mentioned, like electrical engineering or mechanical engineering. But so does the rest of the organization, whether that's a legal discipline and knowledge around legal or finance. Whereas sales tends to be a little bit less obvious, right? And so right off the bat, there's a little bit of a barrier to overcome for salespeople and sales leaders, because there may be a missing element of respect there. And so what I learned is that most of the view out there was that salespeople were kind of out for themselves, that sales leaders were out for the next dollar or the next commission. And they didn't take the time to always understand what the overall business was trying to achieve, or what some of the commitments and expectations they set for customers, how that trickled down into workload or things that needed to be corrected for other teams. And so right off the bat, there was a disconnect between what I would say is intent. And so a very critical lesson that I learned was that you can have information on one side and information on the other side. And in the middle, there's a gap of information. And what I learned to teach our teams was we all have a choice of what we put in that gap. We can put mistrust in that gap, or we can put suspicion in that gap, or we can put trust, and we can fill that gap with good intent. And so the first thing that I kind of set out to explain is that everybody had good intentions. Everybody was trying to do the right thing, but because there was a lack of really respect for one team's skill set, I had to spend a lot of time educating the other side on the day-to-day activities of a salesperson. Vice versa, I had to go to the sales team and I had to explain to them, when you set expectations that are unrealistic around delivery or solutions of what a product can or can't do, the level of impact and the trickle-down effect that has on these people that bust their butts every day to deliver for you. So I guess a long story short, the first basic thing was doing some research, identifying very specifically what the gaps were, educating both sides, and then when we don't have the information to fill the gap, getting everyone to have the right culture to fill that gap with the assumption that the other side has good intentions. And the gap that existed before really had the two teams just really speaking different languages, and oftentimes pointing fingers. So it was invaluable, and I think it really helped bring a lot of awareness to me personally from a career standpoint, and bring people together to better collaborate.
That's great. I think what we'll do is we'll end on our last question. And I'm curious if we have students out there that are interested in following a similar career path as your own. Any advice or suggestions as you look back on your career that they could do to kind of get ahead in a sales leadership role, or in terms of a P&L responsibility?
Yeah, I think, again, the obvious are the obvious, right? Work hard, have good integrity, all those things that everybody knows, but truly put those to practice each and every day. So, and that goes back to the first thing I said, which is just showing up. Show up and be the best version of yourself each and every day that you can. That will automatically kind of put you in that top 20%, in my opinion, because not everybody makes those correct choices each and every day and invest their time the way that they can. But beyond that, I would say that first, identify an industry or a set of industries that you think you have a real personal passion about. And that's not always easy to do when you've only been exposed to what you've been exposed to. So expose yourself to as many different experiences as you can, whether that is through talking to different people that come to present at the university, whether that is researching different industries, talking to leaders in those industries, talking to family members that are in all sorts. So educate yourself and try to identify a couple industries that you're really passionate about. The second thing that I really recommend is find as many mentors in that industry as you can. So when you find the industry or industries that you're passionate about, and you find the career path, whether that's sales or something else, try to identify with a few people that you really think you can learn from, and then go to those individuals and ask for them to provide you mentorship, and solicit feedback and input from them often. Run challenges by them, bounce ideas off them. What I found is that, there are so many people willing to help others that are coming up through the ranks. And if you can have the perspective of 3 or 4 people that you really respect and value, the trajectory and exponential effect of your learning, and the ability to model what others have done versus reinventing the wheel will put you kind of in a class of your own. And then I would say the last thing is, as you find yourself in different roles, continue to push the organization to invest in you. Whether that's in additional training, whether that's in job assignments, push your leadership and your bosses to give you more and more and more. And very quickly, they'll realize that you have the right attitude. And when you combine your mentorship with bringing the right attitude every day and continuing to push for more, it'll really set you at the top end of that 20% group. And then last, and this is something I learned along the way. Don't be afraid to make a change, right? If very quickly you realize that you're not in the right company and you're not in the right industry, or you're unable to identify with the right mentors, you need to make a change. And I'm not suggesting that folks bounce around, because that can have a negative effect as well. But it's really finding that balance between your path and knowing what's right from you, but also not kind of giving up on it too early, and making sure that just because you hit some adversity, you kind of cut bait and run. So it's finding that right balance. But I think in the times in my career where I realized I've given it my all and it just isn't right, when I had the guts to make a change, that change for the most part always led to more and more growth and more personal opportunity. So I'd say, those are probably the biggest pieces of advice that I could give.
That's awesome points. I really appreciate it. Eric Jacobs is a Chief Revenue Officer for Aligned Energy. Eric, thank you for sharing your story and advice today.
My pleasure, Kate, and go Ducks. So.